The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the August presentation from the past DBA Fundamentals meeting. I hope everyone can hear me clearly. Today, Argenis Fernandez, he will present Rolling Upgrades the Easy Way. If at any time during the presentation you have any technical issues, please send me a direct message and I'll try to help you out the best I can. You will also notice that there is a Q&A area, so you can ask questions at any time during the presentation. Argenis will keep an eye on the Q&A area, and I will also, and we'll answer those questions as we go. My name is Mike Brumley, and I'm a co-founder of the DBA Fundamentals virtual chapter. We're very happy that you have joined us today. You can feel free to send me an email at any time, and you can reach me at mike@dbafundamentals.com. Our web address is fundamentals.sequelpass.org. and you can get all the information on all of our upcoming presentations. I want to thank SQL for allowing us to use their service today, and I wanted to let everyone know that there are actually 3 SQL Saturdays this month. There's one in Indianapolis on the 8th, this coming Friday, and there's 2 on the 22nd in Oklahoma City and in Birmingham. I encourage everyone to get involved with your local meetings and try to make these SQL Saturdays. On August 19th, Aaron Stiletto will present the Roadmap to a Better Performance, Reading Query Plans. I hope everyone here can attend that one also. Argenis Fernandez is a senior database engineer for SurveyMonkey, and he's based out of Redmond, Washington. He has worked with SQL Server for over 15 years and enjoys large SQL Server farms. He enjoys high-end OLTP databases, performance troubleshooting, high availability, disaster recovery, best practices, and PowerShell scripting. Prior to SurveyMonkey, Argenis previously worked at Coinstar Redbox and Microsoft Consulting Services. He holds the MCM SQL Server 2008 certification, and he also founded the PASS virtual chapter for security. That being said, Argenis, I'll let you take it away.
All right, thank you very much, Mike. Folks, my pleasure to be here. I am here in the SurveyMonkey office in Palo Alto, California. I wish I could call it sunny Palo Alto, California, but it's not sunny at all. It's actually really clouded today. So anyway, thanks for having me here. Today's talk is Rolling Upgrades the Easy Ways. What we're going to talk about basically is how to perform rolling upgrades, and I'll give you guys a definition and what are the different methods that we have available to us to do rolling upgrades, perform rolling upgrades. And so it'll be hopefully a very entertaining talk for you guys, because we're going to go through a myriad of scenarios here. And one thing that I wanted to ask you guys is that if you're ready to ask a question, please just go ahead and submit it. I'll be watching the Q&A box every once in a while, so if there are any questions sitting there on the queue, I will be if they're relevant to the slide that we're currently on or the scenario that we're currently going through, I will be making a little pause there on the presentation to answer that question so we don't lose continuity and we don't have to jump topics. All right. So by way of a quick introduction here, I am a SQL Server MVP. I am a member of the database engineering team at SurveyMonkey, as I said before. I used to work at Microsoft Consulting Services. Almost an MCM, SQL Server 2008, a friend of Redgate software this year. I used to be a part of the Idera SQL Server ACE program. And I regularly speak at all these conferences for which you see these logos in this slide. I will be speaking at the PASS Summit 2014 this year in Seattle, Washington. And so let's get right to it. Let's see a definition here. What is a rolling upgrade? A rolling upgrade, this is verbatim, upgrade of a software version performed without a noticeable downtime or other disruption of service. So there's many ways that we can actually perform rolling upgrades. Okay, let's look at the scope for today's talk. We're going to put a heavy focus on database mirroring, and you guys are going to, if you follow along, you're going to understand why I like database mirroring so much. It's actually easy. I have a full slide on it, so we'll discuss it further. we'll definitely evaluate lock shipping as an alternative for running upgrades. Lock shipping is one of the most basic technologies for HA and DR that's available on SQL Server, and we'll discuss that further. We will explore, though not in detail, how to handle availability groups on SQL Server 2012 and SQL Server 2014 for running upgrades. So yes, you can perform an upgrade one version to another using availability groups as well, just like mirroring and lock shipping. We will also mention failover cluster instances, clustered instances or clusters, but it will be a brief mention. Okay, I'm not going to go into details, and I'm not going to demo it because the demos on FCIs are rather complicated, and this is, after all, the DBA fundamentals PC. We will not discuss OS level upgrades during this talk. OS level upgrades are a completely different conversation. Okay? We can spend several hours just talking about OS level upgrades, and that's not in the scope for this talk. So we're going to focus ourselves, restrict ourselves to running upgrades on SQL Server versions. So one version to another, say 2012 to 2012 SP1 or 2012 to 2014, etc., etc. So you're going from a previous build of SQL Server to a newer build of SQL Server. That's what rolling upgrades are going to be about, and this is the scope for today's presentation. So the features and builds that support running upgrades. All right, running upgrades with database mirroring are supported starting in SQL Server 2005 SP1 and above. If you guys remember, database mirroring was also launched on SQL Server 2005 SP1. So if you want to migrate, for example, from SQL Server 2005 SP1 to 2008, you could do that. As long as you are on SP1, if you are on 2005 RTM, you will not be able to establish a mirror. For failover cluster instances, this is supported on SQL Server 2008 RTM and above. When I say RTM, I mean no service packs. So the first version that was released for SQL Server 2008 for failover cluster instances. For availability groups, though, this is supported since SQL Server 2012 RTM. So you could go from any of those versions to anything above it using any of those methods. And we will definitely look at each in detail. I wanted to make a slide here to highlight how I seriously dislike InPlace upgrades. The reason there are many. The first one is that there's too much risk inherent to the upgrade process. If you have a server that's your production server and you don't have HA or DR for it, meaning you don't have it in a cluster, or you don't have it mirrored, or you don't have it on an AG, it's probably a really bad idea to just in-place upgrade that server. So if you, there's no easy way to test it either. So it could kind of be placing a bet on a process that has literally millions of possible combinations, and so I don't know that anybody at Microsoft has tested each and every possible combination of different builds and different features that are at play for every single instance that could be out there on SQL Server. So I don't know that I would trust, fully the capabilities of in-place upgrades, so I try to shy away from them. The last thing you want to know is that the upgrade failed and that you're left with a useless server, especially if you don't have HA or DR or ADR for it. Clean installs on first image servers. So a new server, brand new box, it's always the best way. So if you have the resources to do this, it's highly recommended that you do it that way. Just get a new box, freshly imaged Windows, install SQL on top cleanly, and then perform a rolling upgrade to it, as opposed to doing an in-place upgrade. Right? So if you upgrade the one box that you have, and you have nowhere to go, if there's something wrong with that process, you're going to be left with a big hole, big gaping hole. Now you have to recover from that. It's painful, so you want to try to stay away from that. Try to play it safe. I always become a little bit paranoid when it comes to migrations. Right? So I don't like to do upgrades. I like to do migrations, and running upgrades get me there. I can perform running migrations as opposed to running upgrades. Now, mirroring for running upgrades. Why do I like mirroring so much for upgrading from one version of SQL Server to another? Well, number one is high availability. Mirroring just like availability groups, is near real-time log shipping. It's available in standard edition. There is no need for a Windows server failover cluster. So you don't need to cluster two machines to create a mirror. And mirroring doesn't even need to be on the same AD domain. So you could actually establish a mirror between boxes that are on separate domains. It's a great alternative. Mirroring does not have shared storage, and so the duplication of data, because you're going to have copies of your database on the primary and the secondary for a mirror, that offers a plausible rollback plan. Because something goes wrong during the InPlace upgrade on your secondary, which is now going to become your primary, you can always roll back to the what used to be the primary. You can still maintain minimal downtime for that. It's going to be on the second range if you do it correctly. Now here, SurveyMonkey, I'm going to tell you guys a little bit. Mike, you probably want to go on mute. Mike, can you hear me?
Yes. Am I not on
Mike,
mute?
you probably want. Yeah, you should go on mute, please. So I was talking about duplication of data for mirroring, and I was going to give you guys an example. The the migration of SurveyMonkey from SQL Server 2008 R2 to SQL Server 2012 was performed using this method, right? We used database mirroring for this. So we had our new cluster set up with SQL Server 2012, and we had our original cluster, what used to be our production cluster, running SQL Server 2008 R2. We failed over to our SQL Server 2012 instance using the mirror, and our downtime on the database side, it was something like 11 seconds. And that was actually way too long because we had to type something on script that we missed. So it could be way less than that. 11 seconds, that's pretty good downtime for a migration. The last time that we did an upgrade here at SurveyMonkey was for a cumulative upgrade. So we failed over from one node to the other after the other node had been patched to the newest cumulative update. And that failover took less than 3 seconds. So 3 seconds of downtime on a heavily used website like ours, it's precious. It has no value. It has infinite value to your business, actually. You want to maintain the best availability to your databases. While you upgrade them, mirroring is a great alternative. This is another interesting point for mirroring, to consider mirroring. You do not need similar hardware for the mirror. So you can be running the similar servers, so they don't have to be of the same caliber in terms of CPU, RAM, or storage. The new hardware could be maybe less powerful or even more powerful than the new one. And so guidelines here. This is something that I just essentially copied from books online. If the operating mode is basically, I'm gonna break it down for you guys. If you don't have high performance mode, which means synchronous mirror, I'm sorry, high safety mode, you have to go high safety, which is essentially synchronous mirroring. If you have witnesses involved, then you have to follow this this chart here. So you go from high performance without a mirror, high performance without automatic failover, high safety with automatic failover to upgrade the mirror instance. So if you have witnesses, refer to this slide. Now, I am going to post these slides on the website. I am going to be providing these to the nice folks at the DBA Fundamentals VC, and they're going to be posting these on the website. So you just have to refer to this slide if you have a mirroring configuration that has witnesses. Now, I'm going to demo this. I'm going to show you guys what I have here. I have two VMs here, and you're going to have to excuse the names of these VMs. They're not really straightforward. I lost the VMs for this presentation last night. My SSD died on me. Yes, last night. So I had to borrow these two VMs from work so I could do this demo. And so here we have the primary instance, what I consider my old server, CorpDBC 03-1. That's running SQL Server 2012. And I have this other instance here, which is Corp DBC03-2, which will be my SQL Server 2014 instance. And now I am going to be demoing these three methods of performing the routing upgrade. I have a database here that's being log shipped from DBC03-1 to -2. And there's another database here that's it's called test mirroring. It's being mirrored, right? Synchronous mirrored from DBC03-1 to DBC03-2. And I also have this database called test.ag, which is being replicated to DBC03-2 using availability groups. Okay. Now you might be asking yourself, well, did you upgrade DBC03-2 from SQL Server 2012 to SQL Server 2014? No, I did not. I actually installed this VM from the ground up, having it's just an instance of SQL Server 2014. And what we're doing here, we're going to look at all of these different methods. We're going to be failing over these databases from DBC03-1 to DBC03-2, right? And I also have a script here. It's basically just a very simple PowerShell script. I'm going to show it to you guys just a second. A very basic PowerShell script. Just bear with me for a second. I'll show you this. I am also going to be making this available. This is just a very, very basic PowerShell script that essentially just establishes a SQL Server connection to this instance, and it'll attempt to connect to this other instance if it's unable to connect to this instance. It'll try to use whatever database was specified here, and it'll use integrated security. And then it will just execute this one command, which is select count star as count from from dbo.test table. That is really it. That is the only thing that this script does. If it's unable to connect, it'll just error out. If it's able to connect, then it will just output the count from that table. So this is just a very simple way to test how these things work. We are here, we're not test, and I'm sorry that I'm typing on the demo, but I'm going to be, unfortunately, just have to do it for this demo. I had the previous database that I was testing on. So the database that we're going to be using for this test is test mirroring. All right. So test table, if you guys want to take a look at that, we're here on the primary. I'll do a select star from dbo.test table, and that's only got 10 IDs on it, right? It's a very basic table. There's nothing fancy about it. I just wanted to highlight the point of how data is being replicated from one side to the other. Now, you might be wondering, is there a way for me to read the database, that same table on any of the on its secondary? Well, no. And this is how it would actually look on the secondary. When you look at DBC03-2, the mirroring database, test mirroring database says mirrored synchronized but restoring, meaning it's not available for reading. Okay, so you cannot make any of these databases available for reading on the secondary. The reason is that when these databases have to come online for reading, the metadata and the data and the actual physical structures of the database will get upgraded to the next version of SQL Server. So the database engine, when it runs crash recovery to bring that database online for reading, will notice that the version of the database is a previous version of SQL Server. And when it tries to bring it online, it says, wait a second, that's a previous version of SQL Server. This is, and you want to bring it, you want to make it readable, you need to upgrade it first. But this is part of a mirror or log shipping configuration or an AG configuration, so I am not able to bring it online as readable. Now, you can definitely bring it online and make it readable on the same major version of SQL Server. So if you have SQL Server 2012 on the primary and SQL Server 2012 as P1 on the secondary, then for sure you can make it readable. But if you're between major versions of SQL Server, the engine has to perform what's called a database upgrade or an engine upgrade for the actual database, then it will not go through. It will not make it readable because it's unable to. All right, so let's do the demo doing database mirroring here. Now this database here, test mirroring, it's principal and it's synchronized, okay? So if I go into the properties for this database and I hit the database mirroring tab, and I actually think I don't have zoom it enabled, so I'm going to zoom it. I want to launch zoom it here. There we go. So I can show you guys. So right now the database is on high safety without automatic failover, so it's synchronous. I don't have a witness involved in this configuration. Okay. The databases are fully synchronized, so I can go ahead and perform a failover. All I really have to do is just hit this failover button here, or use the T-SQL construct for that. So in this case, I'm just going to go like, boom, failover, and it's going to tell me that if I want to fail over to the mirror and close all connections to the current principal database. Failing over the database mirroring will swap the roles. That's exactly what I want. I have SQL Server 2012 on one end and SQL Server 2014 on the other end. I want to perform this failover and I want to see the database upgraded. Do I want to do this? Yes, I do. So when I hit that, two things are going to happen. Right? On the primary, we can see that the mirror is now suspended and it's restoring. So this database is actually still available under the hood. It's just suspended for mirroring. It's now restoring. Okay, so it's you want to remove this database from the mirror essentially, and then you want to recover this database with no restore database with no recovery. If you ever want to bring it online. I would not suggest that you bring the secondary database, this is now the secondary database, correct? We now have the primary, and I'll show you in just a second. I will never recommend that you bring online a database that you have upgraded. And the reason is that if you still have application servers connecting to the old database, you might have data loss. Okay, so if you have applications connecting still to DBC03-1 in this example, and I bring this database online, which has now been upgraded, I'm going to show you guys. I'm going to go to the secondary here. It used to be mirror synchronized restoring, but if I refresh this, you can see that this is now principal and suspended, meaning that this is the principal in the mirror configuration, but the mirror itself has been suspended. And the reason why it's been suspended, it's because the transaction log can no longer be sent down to an earlier version of SQL Server. Right? That's the only reason why this is suspended. Now, we had 2014 on one end, and 2012 you cannot mirror from 2014 to 2012. So now the mirroring session is suspended, but you still have a secondary that's online here. You have your primary that's fully online here. Now, going back to the point that I was trying to make previously, the mirror, this guy on DBC03-1, test mirroring is now a secondary, and it's suspended and it's restoring. You do not want to bring this database online, because if you have any application servers that are still trying to attempt to write data to the test mirroring database on DBC03-1, that data is going to be lost. It's not going to be replicated to DBC03-2. Okay, so keep that in mind at all times. Never bring the other databases on the former primary online unless you're performing a full rollback, or you're made sure that your logins are disabled. That's another way to make sure that you don't have any issues there. All right, so going back to the primary here, I was going to demo. Actually, it's 9:23 already, so it's a little late to run the demo. But basically, what the demo does is what the script does. So it actually have it here on a loop. I always had it running, but the errors are now lost actually. So basically, the app just runs that, and it brings the count. That's really it. So what would happen is that during the failover, you will see a couple of these that will bring error messages. Unfortunately, these are running way too fast, and you couldn't see any. But basically, as you run these, you notice how it attempts to connect to the primary, and it's unable to, and so it attempts to connect to the secondary. I have changed nothing on this script. So the second every time it tries to connect to the primary, it's unable to, and then it just fails or tries to connect to the failover partner. Okay, so that was the demo for database mirroring. And I'm going to look at the Q&A panel real quick, and there's a question here on how to add a data file on the mirrored database. So there's a way that you can do this. When you add a data file, you can actually do a restore log of the transaction log that failed to apply, that has the actual instruction to add the data file. You can actually run the restore log command manually with move. So you can actually say restore log database name from disk equals blah 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 with move, and then the restore log statement you can actually specify that. And so hold on, I got a ton of questions here. Will the recording be sent out after the webinar? Yes, and somebody's already answering these questions. So I answered this question already of how to add a data file on the mirror database again. Restore log with move. Somebody else asking another question. Did this 3-second rolling upgrade downtime include the application failover? And the answer to that is, well, no. And the reason is because our the application servers are not configured to use a failover partner in their connection strings because it's not supported. But we're working on that. So the application failover was around more like 5 minutes. But the 3-second rolling upgrade was for the database itself. Now, if your application supported a connection string specifying a failover partner on a connection string, then you would not run into a more than the database downtime that I mentioned before. What about uncommitted transactions? That is a great question. So if you have a primary secondary configuration and you have a transaction that's going on in the primary and you fail over, the transaction is going to roll back, right? And the transaction is also going to roll back on the secondary. As you know, the transaction log is always replicated regardless of the transaction being committed or not. And so when the secondary realizes that it's an failover situation and it's about to become primary and crash recovery is run on the secondary to now become the primary, any transactions that are not committed are rolled back by the crash recovery process. I have another question here. When your primary database became suspended, what happened to the log files? Primary database becomes suspended. What happened to the log files? Nothing. The log files are still there. Is transaction log being sent from A to B? No, it's not. Because that's exactly the point of suspended. There is no transfer of data. There is no transaction log being shipped from one place to another. I have one more question here. In a mirroring environment, do people then perform backups on all instances or mirrors, or just keep backups on the main primary server? Well, on mirrored instances, you cannot perform backups on the secondary, but you definitely can perform backups on a primary. Now, on availability groups, though, you can definitely back up a secondary server. But there are several considerations for backing up a secondary server or a replica on availability groups for SQL Server. So I suggest that you research a little bit more into that, because it's just not set it and forget it. It can get a little hairy there, performing backups on secondary servers. I have one more question, and then I'll move on to the database again. I'm sorry, to the presentation again. What are the considerations around database settings, such as DB owner, trustworthy, etc., on the new primary? Well, it really depends on your application. A database owner, for example, should not matter if you have set it up correctly. It should, once you restore the database on the primary to seed mirroring, it's going to, and the owner of the database is going to be whatever owner you have specified, whatever user is running the restore statement. So if the database owner matters for you, then you should be running the restore statement to see database mirroring as that user, or just execute you can change the owner of the database as well. I'm going to move on back to the presentation here, because we're actually a little bit low on time. It's 9:29 a.m. And like I said, that was a running upgrade using database mirroring. Now let's talk about log shipping. Log shipping is very underrated. Log shipping is included on every edition of SQL Server. Yes, even Express, even Local DB, even Web Edition, Workgroup Edition, or whatever edition of SQL Server. Log shipping is included on it. It may not have a GUI for it, but you can definitely implement log shipping on every single version of SQL Server. Now, log shipping was once referred to as mirroring was actually referred to as real-time log shipping, because essentially what it's doing underneath the hood is just shipping log from one point to another. It's just doing it automatically for you. You don't have to copy back transaction log backups from one place to another. That's what mirroring and availability groups do for you. It's the same thing as log shipping is doing. It's just on an automated fashion. Now you can use the GUI to set it up, or you can roll your own. If you use the GUI, then you're restricted to whatever the GUI, whatever SQL Server uses to as job names, etc., for your log shipping restore, your log shipping copy, and your log shipping backup jobs. Now, SQL Server jobs can run every 10 seconds, but you can roll your own scripts and copy restore even more frequently. Right? You don't have to use mirroring if you don't want to. You could do log shipping every 5 seconds even if you can afford it. If you have a really fast network and fast storage, you know, taking a transaction log backups, it's typically an operation that doesn't take a lot of resources from your box. Copying the transaction log to another box shouldn't take those many resources either, and restoring the transaction log on the other database, it takes very little resources as well. Now let's do a running upgrade using log shipping here. I'm going to show you guys how I have set up a log shipping database here. And I have a lot of questions today. This is a good topic, I guess. Compatibility modes of the databases, do they matter? Well, the compatibility modes, you have to remember, the compatibility modes have nothing to do with the actual physical structures of the database. Compatibility modes are only there for T-SQL constructs. So T-SQL constructs can behave in a different way on different compatibility modes, and you might not have certain T-SQL constructs available to you on all the compatibility modes. So newer features might not work.
Hey, Argenis, real quick, these questions, when they come in, if you don't have time to get to all of them, I can send you a list of them, and you can kind of get back to them on that also, just so that you don't get tied up answering all the questions all at once, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, that's good, Mike. Yeah, I only have two more that I'm actually going to go through, because it looks like there's a lot of interest on some of the inner workings of this. So I want to answer these to make sure that folks understand what we're discussing here.
Right. It's a great presentation.
Right. So there's one more question here. Can we truncate the transaction log when database mirror goes into suspended state? My question there will be, why would you want to truncate the transaction log if it's suspended? Where do you want to truncate it, on the primary or the secondary? Truncation of T-log is something that's very dangerous, because if you're not backing up your transaction log, then you cannot no longer recover to a point in time, which is very, very useful if you're on a downtime situation and you need to recover to a specific point in time. Say, for example, 10 minutes ago before somebody dropped a table in production. So that's critical. Truncating the transaction log is something that I very rarely do. I almost never do it. At this point, when you, this is another question. At this point, when you have failed over to the 2014 instance in the mirror, the version of this of the database is still 2012 at this point, or correct? Just running on a 2014 instance? No. When you have failed over to the 2014 instance in the mirror, something called crash recovery takes place against the database, and that's the process to bring the database online. And one of the first things that process is going to attempt to do is it's going to perform an engine upgrade for that database. So it's going to bring it to now a 2014 version of it. So it's going to upgrade. It's going to go through all the metadata for the database. It's going to bring it to 2014 standards. And now everything is going to be 2014, and at that point you can no longer use that database elsewhere. One last question before we go back to the presentation. Can all these methods be done going from SQL 2008 to 2014? Well, if you remember, one of the first slides that we had at the beginning of the presentation was the supportability of these methods. You can definitely use log shipping to go from SQL 2008 to 2014, and you can use database mirroring to go from SQL 2008 to 2014, but you can definitely not use availability groups to go from 2008 to 2014 because availability groups was actually introduced on SQL Server 2012. Okay, so that was all the questions. And now I am going to go back to the presentation here. I was actually going to perform a demo doing log shipping. So you can see here I have this test log shipping database here sitting on my primary on DBC03-1. The properties for this database, I can go to transaction log shipping here, and I can show you how the secondary instance is DBC03-2. Okay, this database is set up to backup every 15 minutes, which is the default when you set up transaction log shipping. Now, something that I wanted to show you guys is how it looks on the secondary. Around in the primary, you don't see anything special particular. I'm sorry, I hit the wrong button. On the primary, there's nothing special about this database. What you see is just a database. You don't see that it's actually being log shipped elsewhere unless you go to the GUI and look at the transaction log shipping tab. That is because I'm actually using the native means that SQL Server, the native methods that SQL Server offers for transaction log shipping. Now, on the secondary, this looks like this. Test log shipping shows us restoring, okay? Now you know that this database has been restored with no recovery, and the transaction log has been, it's continuously being applied to it. Big point here, if you're using log shipping manually, you would not see anything on the GUI. Meaning, what do I mean by log shipping manually? If you're just backing up the database, copying the transaction log elsewhere, and restoring it using your own scripts, you would not see anything on the GUI here because essentially SQL Server would not know who the primary is or who the secondary will be. But you can do this whenever you want, to any instance you want, as long as the engines are compatible. Okay, log shipping is one of my favorite methods for shipping data around. And as a matter of fact, when we migrated SurveyMonkey from 2008 to 2012, the way we did it is by first going to log shipping against the new instance, and then we actually moved from log shipping to database mirroring. Because, as you know, you can actually, if you didn't know, well, let you guys know now, you can actually move between log shipping, mirroring, and AGs interchangeably. The basis of all is basically log shipping, and it all starts with a backup being restored in a secondary instance and transaction log being applied to it. Now, how would you fail over a log shipping configuration for a rolling upgrade? Well, the way that you would do it is by taking the primary database and performing one last transaction log backup on it as a tail of the log backup. So I am going to show you guys here. When you have a log shipping configuration, then you have at least two jobs created here in the primary. The LS alert job, which essentially runs every once in a while and checks that transaction log is being applied to the secondaries, so it doesn't have to, and it lets you know when you're running behind. And the LS backup job, which is essentially the transaction log backup job. Now I'm going to disable these jobs because I don't want any of these running right now. I don't want an additional transaction log being taken, transaction log backup being taken on this database. And what I'm going to do, and pardon me, I did not create a script for this. I'm just going to type it up here as we go. And the syntax will be backup log test log shipping to disk equals whatever my default backup directory is. In this case is C backup. Yes, I am doing stuff on the C drive, you guys. Do not try this at home. This is just a demo. Backup log, test log shipping to disk equals test log shipping. I'm going to just take the name of the database here from the GUIDs instead of typing so much. And .trn. And I'm going to just call it _final. And I'm going to say this is key with no recovery. When I do this, when I do the transaction and the backup log with no recovery, this is what's called a tail of the log backup. It's going to back up all the transaction log that has not been backed up as of that point, and it will bring the database to a restoring state, so it's no longer readable. Why do I want to make it no longer readable? Well, you guys have to remember, if we're failing over from one instance to another, then we do not want the primary instance to be readable or writable anymore, because we don't want our transactions to read all outdated data or even write data that is never going to be replicated to the secondary. You have to remember log shipping has no automated mechanisms for failing over like mirroring and AGs do. So now we're just essentially doing what mirroring or AGs would do, just manually. So I'm showing you guys here. Actually, it was not connected. So backup log, test log shipping to disk, that finished, okay? That took that, and now if I refresh my databases here, and actually did not hit refresh, now I did, you can see the test log shipping now it's sitting as restoring, okay? Now, how do I take this transaction log backup that I created here and apply it on the secondary? Well, very easily. I'm going to my backup folder here, and my VM is not that responsive. We'll see. Text log shipping final, there it is. So I'm going to copy that transaction log, and I am going to move it to my secondary. I'm going to copy it here. And my copy between RDP sessions is not working, so I'm just going to reference the server directly. Copy DBC03-1, and the share is called backup. So I have test log shipping final there. So I can take that. I'm going to go back to the previous folder, paste it here, and now I can restore database. I'm sorry, restore log. And this is a little trick. If you shift right click, you can copy as path. And this shows such a time saver, right? So let me show you guys again. I am just clicking on the file and then shift right click. Shift is the key there, copy as path. And that copies the file name as a path. So take that, it puts double quotes around it though. That won't work on SQL, remember, single quotes. Restore log, test, log shipping, that's the name of my database, from disk equals, blah, blah, blah. And what do I want to do here? Now I want to recover on the secondary. So I want to do with recovery, right? So I took that transaction log that was running on the secondary. I'm sorry, I took that transaction log that I created on the primary, and I'm now applying it to the secondary. So it looks like there was a transaction log that was not copied. You see, the error that I got says that the log in this backup is too recent to apply. So that means that my backup jobs here, my copy and alert jobs have not run correctly. And I'm having issues here, so this is being, my demo broke. Okay. Give me just 1 second, you guys. I'm looking at the history here. I just want to see what's going on. Ooh. So when I set up lock shipping, it did not pay much attention to it. And what's going on here? Okay. I'm having some issues here. So I'm not going to, fortunately, I'm not going to be able to fully demo this. But let's assume that this went through. Okay, so pretty much forget about this message. The message never happened. Everything is happy, so I'm just going to type happy here. Right, so the restore log went through just fine. Let's imagine that. And now the only thing that I have to do is to bring it online is restore name of the database with recovery. Restore log with recovery. So I applied that final transaction log on the secondary, and I ran restore log with recovery, and now my database is online on the secondary. Okay? And on my primary, if you guys remember, I left it as restoring. Okay, so it's no longer readable or writable on the primary, on the former primary, but it's now fully readable and writable on the former secondary, which is now the primary that we failed over to. Okay, this are the messages that SQL Server give you when a database is being converted from a previous build to the newest build. And there's several steps. It does it in steps. So it runs upgrade scripts against the database, basically. So it has to go from version 706, which is that version of SQL Server 2012, to version 782, which is the engine version, really, database engine version. And then it runs all these steps to go from 706 to 782. And so you're going to see some of these messages. You could see some of these messages on the error log as well. All right, you go back to a presentation here. So what about AGs? It's complicated. Yeah, it might sound like it, but it's not that complicated. So if you follow best practices, you're on your way. You always upgrade remote instances first, then local secondaries. By remote instances, I mean something on a distant data center, okay, like a DR site. If they are part of the same AG, availability group, then you will upgrade the local secondaries, and then you will upgrade the primary. Take cautionary measures to avoid downtime. Have backups handy. Make sure that you have a failover run book ready to go, scripts ready to go in case something happens. Okay. There's a reference that I can point you to for more information on how to do running upgrades while upgrading the instances on availability groups. It's that link that's there on MSDN. And I'm not going to show it to you guys. I'm just going to leave that exercise to you. But I am definitely going to demo. I'm going to demo a failover using availability groups. And you guys notice how I didn't pay much attention to my application that I had written to read from one database to another. I'm sorry, constantly read from one database. Here's my script. And I'm going to run it now. Test AG. So primary server -1, failover partner -2. I don't have a listener configured for this AG, so I'm just going to go over the AG setup. Test AG is the only database that is involved in the availability group. So if you look at the always on high availability tab, you can see the name of my AG. When you look at the replicas, you can see that -1 is the primary, -2 is the secondary, and on their availability databases, you can see that test AG is the only database involved on the AG. And if I hit on the plus sign on availability group listeners, it shows me nothing because in this case I did not want a listener created. I did that on purpose. Why would I want a listener in this case? I don't know that it will help much. it's going to fail over to the secondary anyway. So if you're reading, if you want minimal downtime, you would definitely create a listener, and you would have everything read from hit the listener, and once the AG fails over, you can continue to query your listener. All right, so that is the reason why. If you have an AG again, you want to have a listener set up in place, and you want to have your app read from the listener. Minimize downtime. All right, so in this case, I'm going to go ahead and kick this off. Oops, I don't have a test table there, but I do have a script here to insert dummy data. So I'm going to go into test AG, I'm going to create a table and insert default values in that table. Okay, so that's it. That's that. And so we're going to select. I now have 10 records, and now if I run my script, it's going to always run 10. Okay, so there's no magic there. I'm just, it's a simple application just querying that count, querying for that count. Now, on the AG demo, there is only one good way, and this is something I really want you guys to take away from this talk. There's only one way to fail over an AG, and that's by using the availability groups wizard or the T-SQL to fail it over to. Always recommend that you use the wizard for the failover whenever possible. So here, in this case, I have synchronous commit on the secondary instance, okay? Synchronous commit on the primary as well. The secondary instance indicates that there's no data loss because it's in synchronous commit, okay? So if I hit next here and I connect to my secondary instance, I hit next. By the way, before I fail over, I want to show you guys on the secondary. I hit refresh here. This is very important. Test AG on the secondary is now synchronized in recovery. This, you would not see this if you were running the major build, the same major build of SQL Server. You usually see in recovery when you are performing a rolling upgrade. So if you ever see an AG that's in recovery, that's likely what it means. Okay, and it's not able to be brought online. Or if you don't have it as readable, you could also see it as in recovery. All right. Typically, you will want your AG secondaries to be readable. Now, going back to the primary, I wanted to perform the actual failover. So if you don't know what the actual T-SQL to perform a failover on the AG is, you can always script it out, do the wizard, and look at the actual code that it spits out. It's just alter availability group failover. But the reason why I recommend that you run through the wizard is to make sure that you have no data loss. All right, really, the wizard does that for you. In this case, using the wizard is a good thing. I highly recommend that. And here I have my app that's running. It's running 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, right? That's all it does all the time. When I hit finish, it's going to perform the failover and see how now this failed. It's performing the failover, but now the failover is complete. Now my app is running again. So let me see if I can actually capture this. It's too many tens, and already for back. So if you guys noticed very briefly, there was a little error message there in red. You could see that the database was attempting to fail over. While the database was actually attempted to be failed over, you saw an error there, and then all of a sudden the counts just started pouring through again. This is, my friends, high availability for upgrades. I failed over, and now if I go to my primary, this is going to change. My -2 is now my primary, so if I go to the primary, I can see that this is synchronized. Okay, and if I go to my secondary, my secondary is now -1. So if I go to -1, let me close that wizard. Pardon me. Now I want to refresh, and you can see here that test AG is not synchronizing. Why is this? Same reason as mirroring. You failed over to a newer version of SQL Server there can be no log movement between major versions of SQL Server from a bigger one to a lesser one. So if you're now attempting to push log from SQL Server 2014 to SQL Server 2012, that is going to fail. So the AG notices this and says, I can no longer synchronize this. You might actually have issues on the primary now, because if you're in sync mode, because you are not able to synchronize the data to any of your primaries, to any of your secondaries. So you have two choices here. You could remove the secondary altogether, or you can move the database from availability groups. Okay, you can simply remove the secondary database, or move to async. At this point, if you have no further secondaries, it wouldn't be a problem, so that your transaction log can actually clear. And I'm sure I have a ton of questions here sitting on the queue, so I'm going to go back to it. Let's see. Tons of questions, yay. All right, so bear with me for just a second. AGs can be done. Can AGs be used to upgrade from SQL 2012 to SQL 2014? Yes, absolutely, and that's what I just demoed. Next question. Since upgrades always start with a backup restore, is there any way to downgrade, for example, from 2014 to 2012? This was an edge case where it was needed in our shop once. Let me say this again. You can never back up and restore to a lesser version, to an older version of SQL Server. There is no way to do that. Absolutely will never work. So the only way that you can, the only method that you have to downgrade database versions is to major versions. Remember, guys, I'm talking major versions. Downgrade from 2014 to 2012, for example, there's no way to do it with a backup restore. You will have to script out your tables and your data. Again, that's pretty much the only way that you can do it. What do you recommend? Another question. What do you recommend the log on account be set on the SQL Server agent Windows service for log shipping? Can log shipping be performed when the log on account is local system? Yes, log shipping can be performed with the log on account. Log on account, by log on account, he means the service account. Can log shipping be performed when the service account is local system? Yes, you would have to grant permissions to the computer object, okay? And it would have to run as network service, not local service. There was a comment here. LOL. I say never pay attention to log shipping. It's only for non-MS SQL machines. All right. Well, sir, thank you for your comment. I have no idea what you just said. All right. So if you have no further questions here sitting on the queue, I am going to go back to the presentation here. Failover cluster instances. I said I was going to mention these briefly. Just like AGs, upgrade the passive nodes first, then failover and upgrade the active node. All right. The database will be upgraded upon failover, just like all the previous cases that I just showed you guys. Right? And there's really not a lot more information that I'm going to give on FCIs. I'm not going to demo FCIs because they can go awfully wrong on the upgrades, and it's a really hard thing to demo. But know what I just said. Always upgrade your passive node first and your active nodes, and have backups. If you can avoid InPlace upgrades, avoid InPlace upgrades and go to a fresh box. All right, so that was my presentation for today. If you guys have any further questions, now will be a great time to ask them. Otherwise, I am going to leave my contact information here on the screen. I am happy to answer any email that you may want to send. You can also follow me on Twitter at DBRJennis. I tweet very frequently, so I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. If you are not on Twitter, highly suggest that you sign up for a Twitter account and you leverage some of the wonderful folks that are part of our SQL family on Twitter. Always willing to help you, always willing to lend a hand. And there's a hashtag called SQL Help on Twitter that is extremely useful. It looks like we do have one more question coming. Let me answer that because I do have a couple minutes here. Let's see. This question is on upgraded SQL Failover Cluster. How do we go about upgrading SQL 2005 active SQL cluster to SQL 2008? Say, for example, I have two nodes SQL 2005 cluster and one and then two. So let me stop you right there. SQL 2005 active clustering, as far as I know, it's not supported. You cannot go major versions of SQL Server on 2005. So you're going to have to go use an alternate method for that. So do not upgrade that cluster, create a new cluster and fail over to it, or create a single instance, fail over to it, rebuild the other servers, and then join them to the one instance that you have on the side. But as far as I know, 2005 not available for that. It's not possible. When you mentioned do failover through SSMS Wizard, no data loss will occur. Does this not apply to failover through WSFC Manager? Absolutely never use the cluster failover manager for failing over an AG. It's a really bad idea. You do not want to let Windows handle your SQL failover. Manage your SQL failover first, and then if you have any Windows failovers to perform, then let Windows do it at that point. But you gotta go over the SQL failover on your own using the SSMS Wizard. That's the best way that I can recommend that you perform that upgrade, or that failover actually. All right, folks. Well, that's been it for me. I truly appreciate you guys coming in today, and I thank you very much for your time. And if you have any further questions, let me know. Feel free to send me an email. Mike.
Argenis, thank you very much. Man, this was a very informative presentation that you gave, and we've had a lot of people that stayed attentive the whole time. One of those persons, Carolyn, you have won our $25 Amazon card. So if you would email me at mike@dbafundamentals.com, I can get your email address, and we can get a $25 email or $25 Amazon card to you. And with that, I would like to say thank you to everyone, and I hope y'all all have a great day.